What's up, Internet? This is Once Over, and I'm Kaylee. Today we're going to be giving the once over to Soylent Green. There will be spoilers. I chose Soylent Green to be the first movie that I'm ever reviewing because, first of all, it's one of my all-time favorites, and second of all, because it takes place in the distant future of 2022.
Welcome to the world of tomorrow!
I first heard about the movie Soylent Green when I was about 10 years old. At the time, I really loved a band called Soylent Green. They spell their name with an I instead of a Y to avoid all those nasty copyright infringements. And I really loved them. I had no idea where their name came from, so I tried to figure that out, and I totally failed. At some point, I mentioned it to my parents, who said, "Oh, that's a movie from the 70s. You want to check it out?" So I watched the movie for the first time, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I haven't stopped loving it since then, and I figure now is the perfect time to review it since it's 2022. Soylent Green is really a movie about truth, but let's start out by discussing the plot. This movie starts out with a bunch of still images, starting from the 1800s and moving forward in time all the way into the dystopian future of 2022. These images start to build upon the themes of the movie, which include overpopulation, scarcity, and the heat wave that everybody is experiencing due to climate change. This movie is set in New York City, and at the time, the population in New York City is supposed to be 40 million. The first characters that we're introduced to in this movie are Thorne, played by Charlton Heston, who portrays a cop, and his roommate Saul, played by Edward G. Robinson, actually his last ever movie role, who really represents wisdom throughout the entirety of the movie. These two live together kind of in squalor. They don't have a lot of luxuries. We know that they must be approximately middle class because Thorne has a job where he obviously has an income, but the two of them live in a very small apartment together. They don't have running water. They power electricity by pedaling a bicycle. And we know that they certainly are not part of the luxurious elite class that we might be seeing in the future. However, we know that they're not the low class. The masses in this movie are shown as living on the stairs and living outside, even though there's oppressive heat throughout the entire movie. During this time, we find out that because there's so much scarcity, that there's a corporation called Soylent, and Soylent Corporation creates nutrients because food is basically non-existent. The Soylent Corporation makes Soylent Yellow and Soylent Red, and these two sources of nutrients are used by the masses. Everybody wants these things, and they can't get enough of them. So the Soylent Corporation is going to be creating a new Soylent. It's going to be Soylent Green. It's going to be made of plankton, and it's going to be much more nutritious than the previous types of Soylent. So everybody's really looking forward to it, and people can't wait to have it. As the movie progresses along, Thorne begins to investigate the murder of Simonson, who is a part of the ultra elite. He's rich. He has every luxury that anybody could possibly want. Not only does he have air conditioning, running water, he has food. He has real food. He has beef and fruits and vegetables and all of the yummy stuff so that he doesn't have to eat anything from the Soylent Corporation. But he also has furniture, which is living girls who are basically concubines of him that give him everything he needs. The main concubine that we get to see throughout the movie is named Cheryl, and she's absolutely wonderful. She's played by Lee Taylor Young, who also was in Passions, if anybody remembers that soap opera from back in the day. It was a good one. While this is happening, he starts to develop a relationship with Cheryl. And while he's investigating, he also begins looting all of Simonson's stuff because he doesn't have any of the luxuries that Simonson has. So he takes lots of stuff from his apartment. He takes things like alcohol, he takes things like food, he takes some of that beef and apples, and then he also takes some more peculiar things. And the last thing that he takes is a couple of books that are produced by the Soylent Corporation, and they are related to the oceanographic studies that the corporation did. He takes all of this stuff home to Saul, and the two of them dine in luxury. Instead of using their plastic silverware, they end up using their real silverware. It's a very elegant meal, and Saul is very excited to start reading through the oceanographic books that Thorne gave to him. So this is really a pivotal moment. This also gives us kind of our first look at the scarcity that really exists. We've seen scarcity already talked about in this movie because people can't get enough of what they want. But here we also get to see the scarcity of the food supply and also of things like books, which really become a luxury in this movie. This movie does one of my favorite things ever, which talks about the scarcity of paper, because in dystopian futures, we can never have paper. On the plus side, this movie did it a heck of a lot better than Waterworld did.
Paper! I've never seen paper!
As Thorne continues investigating the murder of Simonson, he begins to realize that he's being stalked by the same assassin that actually killed Simonson. So now at this point, we as the audience know that there must be something that Simonson knew that this assassin is trying to prevent Thorne from finding out. We as the audience of the movie don't know what that is yet, but we as humans do, because one of the most famous movie lines of all time is that Soylent Green is people. Pretty much everybody who goes into this movie already knows what the end point is, because we all have heard that line before. But at this point, the characters don't know, and we don't know as audience members who are viewing the movie for the first time. So, Thorne continues his investigation into Simonson, and around the same time, Saul begins investigating the oceanographic books. It's here where he discovers for the first time that there isn't actually enough plankton in the world to continue making Soylent Green with. And because of that, he discovers that Soylent Green is going to be made out of people. So, what does he do with this information? He's devastated. The whole world has been a lie for him, and he remembers how great the world used to be. He remembers all the things that used to exist in the universe. So this is even more upsetting for him. And so Saul decides that he would prefer to return home instead of being on this earth anymore. He resorts to assisted suicide, and we get one of the most beautiful movie scenes that has ever existed. When Saul goes in for this assisted suicide, he is brought into a beautiful sterile room where he's able to recline. He's underneath covers, and the entire room is washed in his favorite color, orange. And as he's fading away, he's shown images of how wonderful the world used to be. He gets to see running streams and mountains and animals and flowers. And all of this, he gets to see all these visuals while Vivaldi is playing. It's just an absolutely beautiful scene. Well, during these moments where he's fading out, Thorne actually barges in. And Thorne is not supposed to be able to see any of these images. However, he accosts a security guard and forces the security guard to allow him to see it and speak with Saul. It's during these moments that Thorne gets to see the beauty of the world for the first time. And in addition to that, he gets to hear Saul's final words, where Saul whispers to him what we all know to be the truth, which is that Soylent Green is people. However, in the movie, this is actually whispered, so we really don't actually technically know that yet. But now the main character in the movie, Thorne, has that information. So now Thorne is adamant that he must reveal the truth to everybody. So he decides to stow away in a waste disposal truck where he is going to try to find out what's going on. Now, these waste disposal trucks are kind of like garbage trucks, and they're actually used to bring the dead bodies of all of the overpopulated masses who aren't getting enough sustenance to disposal areas. When Thorne stows away on this truck, he ends up, surprise, surprise, guess where? In the Soylent Corporation, where he sees for the first time with his own eyes that Soylent Green is in fact being made out of people. This leads us to the final scene in the movie, where Thorne reaches up and screams out to the crowd.
Soylent Green is people!
Finally letting everybody know the actual truth of the world. Alright, so now let's talk about some of the really fun stuff that happens in this movie. First, I want to talk about the fact that it is set in 2022, and it is currently 2022. So let's talk about some of the similarities and differences between the movie 2022 and the current 2022. The first thing that I think the movie got totally wrong is the TV that we see right in the beginning of the movie. Thorne and Saul have a TV in their apartment, and I swear to God, this thing is like the size of my phone screen. So that's definitely something that this movie did not predict correctly about the future. But a lot of the other things that this movie kind of thought were gonna be things in 2022 ended up actually happening. I think one of the first and most interesting aspects about something that this movie kind of predicted about 2022 was that, Thorne and Saul are living together. We don't really entirely know the nature of their relationship, so it seems like they're just roommates. So that is not super far off from what a lot of adults are doing in 2022. They're just being roommates because that's what they can afford to do. I think their relationship is also really interesting because we can kind of start to think of them as, what if there was something more to their relationship than just a deep, close friendship? What if we look at them as lovers, and how does that reframe the movie? I think that poses a really interesting question that I don't necessarily know I have the answer to, but I certainly like thinking about it. The next thing that this movie obviously hit the nail on the head about is going to be about the main themes of the movie. So, about overpopulation, climate change, and scarcity. Climate change has been a huge topic in 2022 and in the past few years. I know that that's something that's been on a lot of people's minds, and it's always heavily debated and heavily looked at. So, to see the oppressive heat throughout this movie is very interesting, and really, it feels very real, which is, I don't know, horrifying, but it certainly is something that gives you an extra, look at what all is going on in the world. Scarcity is also something that we've been seeing a lot of, in particular since 2020. We saw in the United States that in 2020, a whole bunch of people went and bought all the toilet paper off the shelves, and then there was no toilet paper. That's something that we certainly see in this movie, not specifically with toilet paper, but with resources like housing and with food in this movie, and anything else that you could really want, having running water, etc., etc. Even things like paper are scarce in this movie. So those things are all seen as luxuries, and we certainly see a little bit of that these. Scarcity also leads into the discussions that this movie talks about when it comes to overpopulation. I think that one of the best stories about overpopulation actually happened on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. The fake news anchor Ted Baxter came up with the best ever solution to overpopulation. He said that he was going to have 100 kids in the hopes that one of his kids was smart enough to figure out the solution, and he suggested that everybody do the same. I don't know that that entirely ties into Soylent Green, but what I do know is that if people had been doing that in Soylent Green, then maybe there wouldn't have been so much scarcity with the Soylent Green because there would have been more people to turn into it. I don't know. I think it's a little bit weird that the movie, makes Soylent Green seem like such a scarcity, and yet there's so many people. They're literally strewn all over the streets. Next up, let's talk about the class disparities shown in this movie. We see that the majority of the people are living on the streets. They can't afford anything. They have to stand in mass groups trying to get their rations that the government is going to be handing out for them. They can't afford anything. Many of them live on staircases outside. And then we see the middle class, which is represented by Thorne and Saul, who have a little bit more, but still really are not doing well off. We see a huge difference between that, like, oppression and horrible living situations versus the opulence that Simonson represents. We get to see here what we would call in the real 2020 the 1%. Simonson owns everything. He has literally everything that anybody could ever want. Not only does he have the material luxuries, but he has the furniture also. And he has like actual furniture that I would think I would kill for, like this chair and this couch and the entire living room. And I'm pretty sure that's an Atari, which didn't exist yet. So is that a prediction? I don't know. One of my favorite things about this movie relates to the furniture, the concubines that the elite can afford to have. I really love how this movie presents them without judgment. There are a lot of movies that discuss the topic of sex workers or people who sell themselves, and almost always, no matter how much they strive to not have judgment against those people, there almost always is some. But this movie doesn't even give us the opportunity to judge Sherelle and any of her coworkers. This is just something that they're doing. It's what they do, and we never even think twice about it. We place judgments on a lot of the characters in the movie at a lot of different periods of time. Why is this person hiding this information versus why is this person not hiding this information versus why is this happening? We ask all of these questions, but we never really look at Cheryl as anything negative. I think that's absolutely incredible and extremely forward thinking. And finally, I think one of the most interesting topics to discuss when it comes to this movie is the interplay between corporations and government and the masses. We see a lot of this in today's conversations, and it certainly is a theme of this movie. The Soylent Corporation hides information from the public, and the government assists them in doing that. I haven't talked about it too much in this video, but we do get introduced to the governor, and the governor is clearly hiding the story. This is something that we talk about a lot in today's society. And I think that this movie really opens up a great place for discussion when it comes to this topic. And with that being said, I would like to close this video by rating this movie. I want to give Soylent Green 6 out of 7 thumbs up. We do a 7 thumbs up scale here because that is the lowest rating that Homer Simpson ever gave a film, and I love The Simpsons. Thank you for joining me on Once Over, and I can't wait to see you next time.